Hello everyone, welcome back. Welcome to this session, which is called Regenerate and Restore: How Fashion Can Have a Positive Impact with Nature-Based Solutions. Before our panel discussion, we're going to hear from Sheila Cooke, who leads 3LM, which is the Savory Network's hub in the UK and Ireland. And Sheila's going to present, to give a bit of context before our discussion. I'd love to invite Sheila to the stage. Please give her a warm welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're just waiting for the slides to come up. Well, what if we could draw down 20 billion tons of carbon annually into soils to rehydrate and cool Earth? What if we could do that? What would that do for us? Well, half of it would be used to mitigate the net emissions that we have annually from our planet. And the other half would be used to draw down the legacy emissions. But it's going to take us a long time to do that, and regenerative agriculture is a key way in which we can do that. But it's about a lot more than just carbon. Carbon is really just a symptom of the problem. And in holistic management, we know that we need to really understand what's the underlying root cause of the problem. Our Earth evolved to have a huge amount of grassland, and grassland mostly grew in places where trees could not grow. The climate or the soil type or the amount of water especially was insufficient for trees. And grasslands are very adaptive and can go all over the planet. The trouble is, though, that humans, through our poor land and livestock management over the last 8,000 years, have halved the amount of grassland. And what's happened to that grassland? It's become what is known today as a desert. Deserts are human-made. They are not natural. So that's the underlying root cause of our problem, is that we've broken the Earth's hydrological cycle. And Earth has really important mechanisms for cooling itself. We've got this glorious sun coming down on us, but it heats up the Earth naturally. And 95% of Earth's power to cool itself is in Earth's hydrological cycles. And because we've converted so much of our grassland to desert, Earth's ability to cool itself is weakened. And this all comes from a scientist called Walter Jena, and he's authored an article called Regenerate Earth. And if any one of you would like to know more information, I can send you this article and videos. Just send me an email at info@3lm.network. And this is all peer-reviewed science. He is a world-renowned soil and climate scientist who is consulted by the UN. So in his article, he calculated, well, what would we have to do to draw down that 20 billion tons of carbon annually? And he came up with these 10 ways. Interestingly, we need livestock to accelerate 8 of those 10 ways. The only 2 that livestock don't impact are reducing our use of fossil fuels and reusing wastes. But the rest of them: stop burning forests and grassland, enhancing the management of forest and grassland, regenerating degraded shelter woods, wetlands, cropping soils, and regenerating man-made deserts back to grasslands. Livestock, well managed, can reverse and improve all of that. So what's regenerative agriculture able to do? It's when we are regenerating land through green photosynthesizing plants, we want it to grow as much as possible throughout the year. It draws down carbon from the atmosphere through the photosynthetic process into a form of liquid carbon that exudes out of the roots in plants and is able to go deep into the soils. Our carbon in the atmosphere and in the oceans came from the soils. So that's where we need to return it to. And it's through green growing plants that we can do that. Secondly, and even more importantly, regenerative agriculture is able to restore the natural hydrological processes to cool climates and offset greenhouse gases and greenhouse warming. There's two really key ways that this happens. One is through transpiration. So when a plant is growing in the photosynthetic process, it draws water up and uses water in the process. And then it emits this mist out of itself, out of the leaves, into the atmosphere. And this transpiration process handles 24% of Earth's radiation. The problem is we have half the plants that we had 8,000 years ago. So we've really weakened Earth's ability to cool itself through plant transpiration. Another really key thing that plants can do is cover bare soil. If you have a warm day in the desert, like in the Sahara, for example, the sun radiating on all that bare soil, and you touch that soil will be 70 to 80 degrees centigrade. If, on the other hand, you had green plants, it doesn't get much more than 20 degrees centigrade. That's a massive difference between 20 and 70 or 80 degrees. And when we have huge land masses like the deserts we've created, they're like an oven cooking our earth. And that heat is going out to the power of 4. And then because we've got these greenhouse gases mirroring it back on the earth, it just becomes this accelerated process. So we need green plants. So here on the left is a picture of our typical degenerative agriculture, which is off-gassing CO2 and water. On the right, we want to cover our land with plants, and that will draw down CO2, which in turn enables the soil to hold moisture. 1 gram of carbon in the soil will hold 8 to 10 grams of water. It becomes a sponge. That's what we're trying to do, is make a sponge. Livestock are key in this process. They are Earth's regenerators. Why is that so? It's because grasslands co-evolved with herbivores and predators, and their natural behavior is what makes and sustains a healthy grassland. Animals, we have no idea how many herbivores used to roam the planet. And it's because of a phenomenon known as baseline reset syndrome, which means whatever we see as children, we think is normal on the planet. But I just want to read you this quote from 1889. It's an account from the US. "The great herd on the Arkansas River through which I passed was from my own observation not less than 25 miles wide, and from reports of hunters and others, it was about 5 days in passing a given point, or not less than 50 miles deep." We had millions and billions of herbivores in the past, and they did not create climate change. In fact, they were doing the opposite. Here's a picture of regeneration on the land with livestock, well-managed, holistically managed livestock, and desertification on the right because of poorly managed livestock. Here's a farmer in North Dakota who gets very little rainfall but is able to regenerate soil using holistic management. And that's the picture you see on the right. And people are right to say livestock are a problem when they are managed poorly. And there's lots of poor ways to manage livestock, and that does contribute to climate change, like feedlots, such as you see on the left. So, big question about methane. What I want you to know about methane is livestock actually generate something called the hydroxyl radical. They kick off a process. And these hydroxyl radicals actually clean up the atmosphere, not only of the cow, their methane, but all the pollutants in the atmosphere to a very high degree. So just in closing then, I just want you to know that there are ways to regenerate our earth, and these are examples of brands who are doing that. So we can change everything by regenerating our earth through regenerative agriculture.
We're going to hear some more from Sheila. For those of you who weren't here before, my name is Clare Press. I am Vogue Australia's sustainability editor and also the presenter of a podcast all about sustainability called Wardrobe Crisis. Now, we are joined, Sheila and I are joined by none other than Helen Crowley. We're so lucky to have Helen here. You may well know Helen from her long and wonderful work in sourcing at Caring, but she's currently on sabbatical for a year, advising the World Economic Forum, and here wearing her hat of, what's it called? Representing Conservation International, where you have a fellowship, and we're going to hear about that. And also by Tommaso Rulli, who is a consultant, who's currently consulting to a large Chinese sericulture operative. And we're going to hear about how this is being applied to the silk industry. But Helen, come on, let's just talk about Davos.
About Davos.
Helen's just come back from this, so I want to know, we talked about this before, what's happening there at this enormous gathering of important leaders and movers and shakers? Regenerative agriculture was being discussed, right?
Right. Well, first, thanks. It's fab to be here, and well done, Nina and the team. This is a really awesome meeting and fantastic expo. I'm really impressed. So I'm so happy to be able to be here and participate with you all. And I'm super happy to be talking about regenerative agriculture.
Making soil sexy.
Yeah. So Davos. So it was the first time I went to Davos. Amazing, wild, bizarre, crazy scene. And we could go on about that. But the bit that I found fascinating, and you can critique Davos, and you can say it's all the world leaders coming there in their Lear jets and so on. But what I found was actually a really exciting and quite a positive side to it. And there was a lot of, I would say that I was not in the main event. I was in sort of the fringe festival around the main event, which was really cool. There was a lot of great presentations. And a lot of really deep and important discussion about action towards climate and how we're going to mitigate climate, and action around nature, and how those two come together with fashion, with food, with the way we use land, with the way we work with transitioning and being more equitable with producers and supply chains. So it was like a breaking down of barriers and unsiloing and mixing of all different people, really getting to trying to talk about the solutions that we need. And it's not just about regenerative agriculture for fashion or for food. Do you know, like, by 2030, half the world's population is going to be malnourished. So the food we're producing doesn't even have the nutrients it needs to have in it. So the whole food system needs to be transformed. And we are part of that system in fashion because we're part of that agricultural system. So anyway, long answer, but really exciting movement. A lot of talk about action, a lot of talk about what we're doing in the next decade. We have a decade. We have 10 years to really turn things around. So it was actually pretty exciting.
Do you want to just touch on how important it is that we consider biodiversity and nature as well as climate impact and climate change? Obviously, they're interconnected, but I've been interested to see that I didn't know very much about biodiversity or about the whole nature piece, although you think it's elementary. And I think we've heard earlier Mary Cray was saying fashion needs to wake up to the climate crisis, but you were saying to me, Helen, fashion also needs to wake up to the nature crisis.
Yeah, indeed. At the risk of, we all know it's bad out there, here, I shouldn't say out there, it's bad. You know, we're seeing, you know, our country, Australia, is an example of a 1 degree world. It's an example of what happens under climate change scenarios. And so we have to absolutely focus on climate. But the bit that has been left behind in the thinking until quite recently is the nature piece. Okay, so let's just clarify a few terms here, right? And at the risk of sort of being nerdy and professorial, but it is important that we get our language right as we talk about this. So nature is all that natural beauty out there. It's mountains and rivers, it's the living and the non-living, right? So a mountain is nature, but it also is only a pile of rocks unless you have the living bit on it, you know. So it's the same with dirt and soil. So soil is part of nature, but it would be dirt without all the microorganisms and the living. So nature is everything. Biodiversity is that living bit. It's the animals, the plants, and the interaction of those, the ecosystems and the species. And that is our stock. That is our asset. That is what we live off, and we are here because of that. It creates fresh air, it creates clean water, it creates everything that we need. So it is so everywhere and so important that we always sort of just take it for all granted. But now we've lost so much, and in the 30 years that I've been a conservation biologist, we've seen this loss we were just talking about. So now we've got to say, okay, let's go back to basics. Climate, and part of solving the climate crisis is actually looking at that basic nature and figuring out how we fix that.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
Tommaso, last year you were here, and I heard you say there is no brand that is unable to, or there's no brand that's able to dodge their responsibility when it comes to the environment. You said every brand has to take that responsibility. A year on, we're going to talk about the silk that you're consulting on now, but are you seeing a change in brands, and can you talk a bit about the context?
Hello. I'm in charge of sales both in Europe and US for the sustainable silk. And I saw after a year, I can say that I saw a big change in the discussion with most of the brands. They realized they have to change. Some of them are new and they already changed and they already started with the right foot. The conversation sometimes is very based on marketing tools to sell to their customer. But that's a start, at least. I say that every brand can use sustainable materials. They just have to reset the standards. You can't think you're using a $3 viscose and replace it with something sustainable at $2, right? You have to make an effort to communicate to your customer that you're doing something better for the environment and for them. And maybe you sell less, but better. Or
Maybe
the
the
customer
marketing
buy
can help.
less, but better.
But maybe the marketing can help move us along. I mean,
Yes.
the urge to be able to say something good. I want to talk about silk. Who's visited a silk, I'm going to say, making facility? That's a broad definition. One hand. Anyone else? No one.
Two.
What end was it? Was it a mill, or was it? Ah, okay. Awesome. Because I think, and I certainly am to blame here, that many of us just think about silk in terms of the mill and the weaving and the dyeing and that kind of end of it. Who even knows how silk is produced? I mean, I understand mulberry leaves, but maybe everyone doesn't. Tommaso, tell us about the sustainability context and problems potentially with the silk industry. How is this stuff produced? And what does it generally look like if we're not talking about the sustainability leaders here?
Okay, silk is the oldest fabric produced in history, 5,000 years ago, from an old lady in China.
Who dropped the thing where she was sitting under the tree and the cocoon
She
fell
should
in the
be very
tea?
famous, but she's not. But anyway, they started this incredible, amazing fabric that is unique, and nowadays has been produced in a very industrialized way. So, of course, China is the place of silk, and until now, there was a chain of production very fragmented in different parts and different companies that produced one company, the mulberry tree, one company, the silk cocoons, then the yarn extraction. So when you don't control the entire process, you don't know what is behind, and you don't know what chemicals and what how there were no certification on organic mulberry trees. So I work for this company that they have been working on silk for mostly island fish for 25 years, and they decided to start this vertical process in a region like Sichuan that is completely farmland, so it's underdeveloped, but it's a perfect place to start for three main reasons. One reason is that Sichuan is the original place of silk along the Silk Road. Another reason is that it's a lower labor cost, so it's better than the coastline. And the third reason that
but hang on a minute. You told me that most brands would just buy the grade, go to the market, buy the silk, get on with it at that point. But what you're talking about is a vertical operation where
vertical
we're
operation.
looking from the trees, the mulberry trees grow what is fed to the silk moss.
You control what you put in the soil. Everything is connected to the soil. This is a mulberry tree farm. This company owns 10 million square meters of mulberry tree farms. And the fascinating part is also they teach the farmers how to use a regenerative agriculture method. So they use intercropping, rotational crop, hills and terrace farming, and they introduce also animals, talking about biodiversity. So it's multiple crops plus chicken, ducks. They eat
move this closer.
Yeah, they eat the bugs and they fertilize organically. So we are in the middle of the process for the organic certification. By end of 2021, we will be organic certified.
We're going to explore exactly what it looks like to do this truly sustainably, I suppose I might say. But what you were telling me before is that brands don't even know where the silk comes from before they buy it in the markets. And actually, most of it is probably drenched in chemicals on the mulberry farms, but no one really knows.
Yeah.
And unless this accreditation or these new systems are put into place, there is no transparency. You mentioned Eileen Fisher. You're now working with Everlane.
Yes.
And you said COS. Is that a secret
COS,
story?
so we starting, they're going to market our silk soon. Tiger of Sweden, also in Sweden. So Calzedonia in Italy. Some brands, they do a marketing, some they don't.
Okay. Sheila, you work for the Savory Institute. Tell us really briefly what that even is. What is 3LM?
Sure. 3LM stands for Land and Livestock Management for Life. We're one of the hubs in the Savory Institute, which is headquartered in the U.S., and our mission is to restore the world's grasslands by educating farmers in holistic management.
At first glance, the connection between the farm and fashion isn't always that obvious. I think those of us in this room are well aware of it, but perhaps at the consumer level, people don't understand that these materials come from the soil. I told you before I'd never really thought about silk coming from the soil. How hard is it to get this connection across to the consumer and also to the decision makers in these big companies? Let's just talk a bit more about soil. Come on. We're told we have less than 60 cycles left by the United Nations. How bad is it and how hard is it to communicate that these issues are linked to our fashion supply chains?
Yeah, Michael Gove said a few years ago when he was head of DEFRA that there are big parts of England that only have 35 to 40 harvests left. So we've lost huge amounts of soil. And I think you're right. People don't connect the dots between our food and fiber and what's happening with our earth.
This session is about putting back and giving back to nature. But how can fashion actually be a positive force for our soils? And perhaps, Helen, you can weigh in on this. But how can we really transition to regenerative systems? Could you give us a case study or an example from caring?
Okay. So, well, first you've got to realize that the regenerative agriculture opportunity here is huge. It's not just about making soils better, it is about sequestering carbon, and it is about reversing climate change. I mean, we're not just, this is a solution. This is a nature-based, this is one of the most ultimate and most important nature-based solutions that we have to focus on. All of us, in our own way, for the next decade, if we're going to reverse the climate problem issue and also reverse the biodiversity loss issue. So it's really critical can't stress that enough. And it's not just regenerative agriculture, it's that of whole how we use the land and how we use the oceans, and what runs off from the land into the oceans. So it is a priority for all industries who are tied to the land, and it's pretty hard to name one that isn't tied to the land or the ocean, right? So fashion is so intrinsically linked to agriculture and forests and land, mostly land-based production systems. We just are. We've used nature to inspire us in what we do for fashion forever, but it's now time to look and say, okay, we've been drawing down from nature and taking from nature. How do we flip that and give back? And sourcing and through regenerative systems is one way. Whether it's regenerative forestry systems, whether it's regenerative agriculture systems that are producing silk or producing animal-based materials. It's all hemp or cotton. All of regenerative can be a lot. We've got to start prioritising sourcing our materials from there and having to...
Give us a quick example. Like, what's it practically? How can it really... What does it look like on the ground?
What it looks, it's doing the hard. You can't escape the hard work of actually mapping your supply chains. I mean, you just can't. You just got to do it. You just got to know where your stuff comes from. You can't claim being sustainable if you don't know where stuff comes from. And then you start working with that system and saying, okay, I'm getting my wool from southeastern Australia and central Midlands in Tasmania. It's superfine wool. What's going on there? You know, who are the farmers? What is the land situation? How can we support the transition of farmers from a chemical-based system to a nature-based system to regenerate? What do we need to do? We work with Savory. Kering joined the Savory Institute as part of one of their frontier founders to say, we want to work with you. We want to promote farmer training. And then you just do the hard work, and it's hard, but it's not that hard, of saying, okay, I want to source from there. Maybe it's a mass balance approach at first. Maybe you say, I'm going to buy the wool from there. I'm going to buy the organic cotton. Someone threw down the gauntlet earlier about organic cotton. Organic cotton from smallholder producers, which most organic cotton is from smallholder producers, is probably one of the greatest regenerative farming systems when it's done in the way that a lot of it is done in places like India. So let's make that work. Let's get the spongy soils back in Australia through the wool production.
Tommaso, you told me before, we talked about this, like how do we transition a traditional farming system towards a regenerative one? And in your case, this company is working with the Chinese government, basically incentivizing this. Could you detail what it looks like for Bombix, which is the supplier you're working with? What is it? How does it look?
The Chinese government definitely has changed the rules in China for environmental standards. So they very strict now, stricter than Europe. And they try to develop a part of China that is more west and is underdeveloped. So they allowed this company from Hong Kong to buy the land in Sichuan province and to teach the farmers how to use regenerative agriculture. This allows the farmers to make 3 to 5 times more income, because they have multiple crops, they have animals, and they can also invest that extra income in education and be specialized technician and grow proportionally in different generation.
So they are rotating the crops in an organic system. Is that how that works?
Yeah, basically there are multiple techniques. Intercropping means that you use mulberry trees and potato, beans and other crops, and then you have to rotate after a certain time. And then they use hill or terrace farming. So when there is a rainfall, they don't, the minerals, they stay in the ground. They don't go down with the rain. So it's all different techniques. One interesting is the introduction of animals in the farms. So chicken, ducks, that they are pesticide, organic, and fertilizers, organic fertilizers. So it's really building an ecosystem that help each other to grow. And there is actually a great movie on Amazon Prime. It's called My Biggest Little Farm. That it's basically what they're doing in Sichuan, and it works fantastic. After a certain period, basically the farm ran on herself, and you don't need to do that much. It's more beneficial long term.
Everyone needs to watch that film, Bette Midler. is sharing it on Twitter, just telling you. Sheila, before you told me a story, you said you'd been working with farmers in Suffolk, and one of them had said, I can't unsee it, or what, I can't turn my eyes off.
I can say. Yeah, my husband Christopher and I spent the last 2 weeks educating a farm in Suffolk, the management team. And after day 3, they were so excited, and they said, we can really read our land and understand what's going on here. And they said, you changed how I see my farm forever. And then at the end, on Sunday night, they said, you know what? I wish we could undo it, because everywhere we look now, all we see is a degraded landscape. And I want to go back and see it the way I saw it before. And they said, you can't undo it for us, can you?
You used a phrase that gave me the chills up there in your presentation. You talked about degenerative agriculture.
Yeah, that's what most agriculture is today. So it's releasing carbon out of the soils primarily through the use of technology.
So it seems to be elementary and common sense that we would like to give our land its best chance of being verdant and supporting us and all the rest of it. And yet, that isn't how it's working. Why not? I mean, I know it's a big question, Helen, but what do we need to turn this around and to change and shift massively towards regenerative approaches?
Right. Well, let's give ourselves a little bit of a break here. I mean, we really are starting on this. I mean, this shifting and transforming a whole system, which really started in the last few years. I've been in sustainability in some shape or form for a couple of decades, and I would say the last 3 years have been pretty amazing, particularly not only in fashion but in food. They're shifting recognition about what you need to do on the land and how that's got to change, and recognition that 37% of the climate solution is nature-based and agriculture is a big part. That is a pretty recent. So I mean, obviously scientists have been talking about it and academics, but as a cultural sort of norm starting to it's pretty recent. So let's give ourselves a break that it hasn't happened yet, but we have to pivot pretty fast. So it is going to take a combination of, there's a lot of entrenched interests, obviously, and a lot of entrenched way things have done in the agricultural system and in all of our supply chain. So, change is not easy. Change is about education, informing, incentives. We've talked a lot about aligning incentives. It's about articulating who pays. Where's the public money pay for farmer training? Where does policy come into it? What is the responsibility of the companies? Should we be driving? What's consumers' responsibility? I think it's very hard for consumers, but I think before the panels have talked about making informed choices and understanding about materials and sort of being emotionally more connected to the choice you're making. There's all those little bits are building blocks that are going to go on this seesaw that is going to eventually create a tipping point where we're really going to leverage cultural shift in the way we grow things and the way we wear things and the way we buy things. But be part of the solution by being informed and understand that there is a complexity here. It isn't just about no animals. In fact, animals are actually really, really important in this. And it isn't about, it isn't just about making new materials, it's about doing our other materials, our natural materials better. It's all part of it. But we do have to start prioritising where we want to direct our attention and our action.
It occurs to me that maybe we need a giant crisis. Maybe we need to hear that there are 30, or 60, either way, catastrophic cycles of soil left before we're... I wanted to say, I'm Australian, up shit creek.
We need another crisis. I actually don't think we need another crisis. We have 60 harvests left. We have a climate crisis and a biodiversity crisis.
But is it about, us reaching a kind of tipping point where people say, well, we cannot continue to do business in the old way?
But I think that's what's happening, exactly. And I think that would be, maybe I didn't articulate it from Davos. There's a shift happening. People are talking about stakeholder value, not just financial value, new economic systems, transformation. There is a real shift happening, and I'm excited because I think the fashion's come a little late to the party on some things, but we like a good party, and we're really, really good at changing the way people informing and changing things and changing the way people see things and feel about things. And I think fashion has an incredible role to play in this next decade of change.
I want to ask some of these questions up here from you guys, but Sheila, you told me that you were working with a wool supplier. They're called HD Wool. They're traders, and then they supply, for example, Hugo Boss.
Yeah.
Tell us a good news story about how you've been able to, or how you've seen this shift occurring.
Yeah, HD Wool is one of our partners here in the UK, along with Ethical Butcher. HD Wool is supplying Hugo Boss, the North Face, and the demand will outstrip the supply quickly. And farmers really need the support from the brands and from the consumers to make the shift.
So are the brands saying we want to source this wool that has been grown under these conditions?
Yes, the brands are definitely saying they want it. The farmers are slower. So here in the UK, nature is so generous, good and kind to farmers. And so farmers haven't had to make a shift. We also do education in Germany. And we get farmers signing up for those courses much faster. The reason is because they're experiencing climate change sooner than we are here in the UK. So when the farmer feels the pinch, that's when they make the change. Or if they've got demand, they follow the money. So consumers have a big role to play along with brands. If you start saying this is what you want, they will change. Absolutely.
Nature's been so good and kind to us. We need to be good and kind to nature. I'm going to stand up so I can read. There's a question up here about certifications. What kind of certification can we look to so that we know that there is regenerative farming at the root of our fibres? We can't all travel to Asia to check. Who'd like to take this one?
So our Bombing Silk now is in transitional process for organic certification with two companies. One is iFoam and one is Series. And in addition, there is a GOTS certification.
I've never even heard of those other two. Say again.
Sorry?
So I only know GOTS, so perhaps I am the alone ignorant person here, but say again, what are the other two?
iFoam and Series. So basically, these are companies, they test the ground and then make sure that all the practices done are without chemical, pesticide, and they come, every number of months. I don't know the details because I'm not in that part of the process. But they, after 3 years, is a 3 years process. We can get a certification if everything is done right, and we can certify an organic product.
I can see you got, yep.
Yeah, can we add to that? So Savory Institute have what's called the Land to Market program, and underpinning that is ecological outcome verification, which enables us to actually know what's the outcome on the land. So the land gets to speak for itself. And nature works in processes, so we're actually measuring processes. We're measuring how effective is the water cycle, the mineral cycle, how effective is the flow of solar energy, and what about community dynamics, which is talking about biodiversity. So we're measuring all of those things over time, and we're able to verify, yes, this farmer is actually regenerating soil.
Can I just add one thing about certification? I get why people want to have verification and certification, don't get me wrong, and I think certification is important. But what we've got to look at here is think about the precautionary principle, which a lot of companies have signed up to, whereas if you think you're doing some sort of damage, you need to stop doing what you're doing. So a lot of the agricultural systems are doing some damage, so we need to move to more restorative. And if it's not certified yet, that's okay, because that move is the right move. So you've got to also support the transition before it gets certified or before it gets verified. You've got to be part of that process. We can't just sit back and go, oh, it's not certified yet, I can't buy it, because the stuff you're buying is probably so much worse. So we've got to just be a little bit sort of more open about and creative about thinking how we make this work in our supply chains and sourcing.
Good point. Okay. I know organic cotton is way better than normal cotton, but is it sustainable? Do synthetic fabrics have a place in fashion? These are two different questions. If you'd asked this in live, I would have said he couldn't have them both. If everyone swapped, would that work? Okay. Is organic cotton necessarily and 100% definitely the better option?
Yes.
Is it sustainable?
Yep.
May I add to that? Sorry, Helen. Organic is a standard, and it's a minimum standard. And different farmers get into it for different reasons. And so when you say organic, there is a wide range of what that means. So you can have the farmer who's in it for the money, and they're just doing the minimum. Or you can have the farmer who's in it for the right reasons. They really care. They really want to regenerate their land. And they're going way beyond the minimum. So you have a wide range.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, there's a nuance to it. But, and that, Patagonia was developing the organic regenerative standard, to try and articulate that, I know the regenerative community doesn't think organic is like, you've got to go way further. But the reason I was so categorical is it's still a great starting point. And okay, you can do better than that. Is it sustainable? We can have a lot of discussion about how you define sustainable. It is certainly not creating damage to the earth. Whether it regenerates the earth in the way it needs to, that's what, to your point, there are different ways you can take it to a different practice, but it's a really good place to start.
I mean, the second part of this question is intriguing, which is, do synthetic fabrics have a place in fashion? And I suppose maybe I'll skew that towards you around saying, we know that something like 66% of the fibre basket is synthetic. So most of our clothes are made from plastic, they're polyester, they shed microfibres into the oceans, and they're made from extractive, mostly virgin, fossil fuel resources. So where do you think we're headed with this with regards to that kind of balance between natural, let's hope, the best practice regenerative, and synthetics? Because asking if synthetics have a place, I mean, it's almost all synthetic now, isn't it?
Our first speaker this morning was pretty clear that there's no role for plastics in fibers because of what it does to the air and the oceans. And Buckminster Fuller said in 1978, we must do 98% change or face 98% extinction. It's serious.
I would agree that we have to really shift. We have to. It's a combination of less and better, as has been discussed a lot this morning. But it's also a shifting to more natural materials. There has to be a shift to more. We've got a lot of degraded land out there that needs restoring, and that's part of the solution as well. I mean, there's a lot of land to do. We could, whether we want to plant trees or have regenerative systems on, there's a lot of land, and we need to incentivize that restoration and that regeneration, and that will come through growing good product, growing good crops, growing for food, for fibre, and so on.
And yet what I see, this is my two penneth, it's a question. I see that many brands would like to use hashtag sustainable, let's say, because they are switching in a bit of recycled poly. Job done. If we're using recycled synthetics, surely we're doing better than if they're virgin. But what's your take on how we need to fit that into the equation?
You look at me. Okay, so
I mean, it's bold to say no place for synthetics, isn't it?
Well, I think, it's so easy to say like, okay, this is where we draw the line. We've got to stop. We all know we've got to help people change. We've got to help people shift. It's a transition. We've got to accelerate that. So I do think that we do have to be careful when we talk about recycling and upcycling, and we've created a rules of the game on LCAs and life cycle analysis about how we count impact, whether it's a recycled or whether it's a virgin product. And that's a rule we sort of created, that if it's recycled, you discount its original its original production, and that's sort of okay. And I get that it's part of moving towards a new system. But recycling and upcycling alone is not going to do the answer. It has to be part of, the circular principles. There are 3 of them, and you have to do them all together. And the first of them is regenerative materials, that you start with material efficiency, then recycling and upcycling, or you can do them in different order if you want. So it's just part of it. And we do need to think of the broader impact and figure out how do we shift this, because this is Sheila said, this is really serious stuff, and we know the solutions, so we've just got to help each other move along that transition.
I've got the wind up, but I would just like for you to each share just a really brief takeaway on what we can all in this room do to move and help the transition towards a regenerative system. I love a tip. We all want one. Come on, Sheila.
I think education is really important. It's really important for all of us. I think someone said earlier to take responsibility as consumers and educate ourselves well and then consume wisely.
I've said a lot on this. I heard this great quote by E.O. Wilson, who is one of fantastic naturalists, that said, our challenge is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. And that's a pretty bad combo. So I think, but the reason I say that, as I alluded to earlier, we have to respect, it's about change management, and it's about respecting where people are coming from, what they're, and working together to figure out these to implement the solutions. We've really got to create a system where people feel comfortable shifting and changing. And so I think there's a lot, it's about education as well.
Brief. Education, collaboration. Tommaso.
Yes, I agree totally, but I think also legislation could be a big part, also to force this change faster. Yeah. I experienced China change in the last 5 years. It was dramatic because they were in a dramatic situation. So in China it's possible because there's only one party, they decide the standards. The standards were here, now they're here. And there are a lot of companies closing, so there are also negative effects on the workers. But I think now in China you can find very healthy and sustainable businesses more than in Europe. So education work maybe in longer term, legislation works immediately. Why they don't tax synthetic products that are not biodegradable or recycled? You know, if you introduce new legislation, there will be immediate effect.
Okay, we are out of time. I feel like I'm on countdown. Please put your hands together for this wonderful panel.